Nothing makes me happier than speaking to college students. When I sat down to write this story, I had no idea that it would resonate. I really thought that I would be the source of contempt and ridicule and that the book would disappear, and I've learned a lot since the publication of the book. And one is how much I underestimated people and their goodness and their kindness. But if I had one fantasy for the book, it was never the bestseller list. It was never being made into a movie or anything insane like that. Somebody asked if it being made into a movie is a dream come true for me. And I have to be a little bit nutty to dream that the hottest star in Hollywood would be interested in my wacky little poor white trash story. My fantasy for my story is that one day students would read it. And so I was thanked profusely when I came in, but I'm the one who thanks you because this represents a dream come true for me. So thank you very much.
And thank you again for the honor of being with us today. There are many students, as you can see, faculty, staff, and I think since our focus at the college is on student success, I'd like to ask you one of the questions a student asked me, but I didn't know. At what point did you realize, as a writer, you were moving from telling stories to being on the circuit and being in this elite company?
Oh, that's a really good question. I still think of myself almost as a reporter. I'm just a storyteller. That's all I am. I've always been drawn to stories. You know, one of the things that both breaks my heart and gladdens me is when people tell me, I didn't know I enjoyed reading until I read your book. Because everybody loves reading. It's just stories. That's all it is. If you like reality TV shows, you're going to love reading. It's just what happened. And I've always been the nosiest person in the world. I love people's stories, and that's what brought me into journalism. The irony, some would say hypocrisy, of reporting on other people's stories while I was hiding my own did not escape me. But I thought nobody would be interested in my story. It's too weird, it's too trashy and raggedy. And I really had to be pushed into writing it. And I was prepared to get fired. I thought I'd lose my friends, I'd lose my job in this meager little standing that I'd worked so hard to carve out. And I was completely unprepared, as I said in my earlier comments, for the reception it got. I was bracing myself for all of these rich people who I knew to spit on me, really literally. I was at a party and this rich woman who in the back of my head, she was one of the people whose reaction to my book had terrified me while I was working on it. She came running to me. And I started clenching my fists. It's like, I can take you on. And she threw her arms around me and hugged me. And she said, I want to thank you for telling your story. It encouraged me to tell my story. And she's somebody, she went to fancy boarding schools and stuff like that, but a very complicated household. So I am getting to your question.
Okay.
I wrote this story, this book, and I thought I'm going back to the day job, which is asking celebrities snarky questions and writing mean things about them. And so I'm on the red carpet interviewing celebrities and sticking my microphone into their faces. And it already started to wear kind of thing for me. It was sort of a hoot that I was doing this, but I never really loved it. That's not what I set out to do. And a funny thing happened. These celebrities would start pulling me aside and say, I want to thank you for writing about alcoholism in such a compassionate way, because your father reminds me of my father. And it was such a valuable lesson for me that we all stereotype. We stereotype ourselves, oh, I'm just a poor white trash girl, or I'm just a kid from the ghettos, or I'm just a suburb, whatever. And we stereotype ourselves and we stereotype others, but nobody is just one thing. So these perfect-looking, gorgeous, fabulously wealthy celebrities who I had stereotyped and ridiculed are much more complex than I'd ever dreamed, and they have a story too, of course they do. And I was never so naive that I didn't realize that. But I started thinking, I can't do this anymore. I believe the truth will set you free, but you can't condense it into a snarky little paragraph. You know, just because something is accurate doesn't mean that it's true. So I'm desperately searching around for a new job. And I have one little slim talent in the world, and that is I'm nosy and like to tell people's stories. And then I started getting calls from universities and lecture series. Say, would you come speak to our students? We'll give you money to do that. I was like, dang, I'll talk to anybody for free about paying me. So I started doing it, and every now and then. I was like, wow. Because I was so desperate to quit my job, I was thinking, what else can I do? I'm really good with animals. Maybe I can become a dog walker. I didn't know what else I could do. And it's so funny how life presents you with these solutions when you most need it. And I started getting regular requests to do this. And so I thought, maybe I could do this for a living. And it's funny because my mother, she's no longer homeless. She lives with me in Virginia, not with me because I'm not a saint. We put her out back. But I thought, and I was sort of torn about, can I quit the day job? I got this incredible day job. I go on television, discuss important issues like who Lindsay Lohan is really dating. Can I really quit the day job and do this stuff that I now love and make a living from it? And I thought, that's hubris. Like, you know, journalism jobs are really hard to come by these days, much less when you're on television. So I thought, I'll go to Mom. She, of all people, will encourage me to follow my bliss. She, of all people, will say, you know, honey, you're an artist, go for it. So I said, Mom, I'm thinking of quitting the day job. I kind of hate it. I don't want to interview celebrities and make fun of them anymore. What do you think I should do? I think I might be able to make a living with just writing and doing the lecture circuit. What do you think? She said, Jeannette, that day job is paying the mortgage on this place. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was such an eye-opener for me. It's one of the reasons that I'm so drawn to nonfiction, is because I would have never predicted that answer for her. She's so complicated. She's not just a wacky, homeless, crazy woman, artist who loves artistic freedom. She also wants to be taken care of. And that's why I love the truth, because the answer's always there. See, things that seem inexplicable, the answer's always there if you're willing to dig deeply enough, if you're willing to be honest. So, shame on me for going to my mom asking career advice, first of all, but that was when I quit the day job. I went to my speaker's agency that had arranged it for these. I said, do you think I can make a living doing this? Could you guarantee me X amount, then I'll make the rest of it? And it's so funny, because I did not go into this for the money.
But it took off from there.
It took off.
And the next thing, you and Oprah are...
Yep, and it just goes to show you, if you, I really do believe if you follow your bliss, if you go after things for the right reason. I wrote a book, people refer to The Glass Castle as my first book. It's my second book. I wrote a first book that sank like a stone. Dish, it was about celebrities. It sold like 8 copies. I think somebody here bought one of them. Well, thank you. Well, thank you. I tried to write a deep book on a shallow topic, and not a lot of people got it. But this was a completely unexpected career. At the same time, I feel like I'm sort of doing the same thing. I'm just a storyteller. That's all I am.
Okay. Well, for those in our group here, we have people who read your novel in 2005 when it came out. Those who have read the first chapter, my students, because it's at Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and those who are meeting Miss Walls for the first time. So, in a nutshell, your novel is a memoir.
It's a memoir. I was asked recently if I was raised of modest means. Honey, there was nothing modest about it. We were poor. You know, we weren't even poor. We couldn't afford the last OR poor. I aspired to be white trash, okay? I had no indoor plumbing. I was the kid in school everybody made fun of. I dressed shabby. I smelled funky. We didn't have indoor plumbing. I worked very hard to hide that fact. But you know, there's not a whole lot of all the perfume in the world wasn't going to come out. And we couldn't afford perfume. My father was a brilliant man, an alcoholic. My mother is brilliant as well, an artist. And neither one of them really, they're both these sort of square pegs that don't fit into round holes or whatever. Round hole. They just don't conform to society. And we kids were sort of left to fend for ourselves. And when I was 17, I left. We traveled all around when I was younger. When I was 17, I left home, moved to New York City, and they followed us. And they became homeless. And that was my big secret. And the secret I was terrified would get out. And that I was convinced would ruin my career if everybody knew this deep, dark secret about me. And then I decided, after going to a fabulous party and seeing my mom rooting around in the garbage, and being genuinely afraid of this information getting out, and the irony, like I said, of writing about other people's secrets, just saying, I have to tell this. And also Mom urging me. I said, Mom, what am I supposed to tell people when they ask me about you? She said, tell the truth. She said, that's simple enough. And you know, it is simple, but the truth is so complicated. I put an epigraph in my latest book. The pure and simple truth is never pure and rarely simple. And anybody who has siblings, who's compared notes about their childhood, knows what I'm talking about, because you might have this wonderful golden memory and they say, what are you talking about? That was horrible, or vice versa. And so when you sit down and write the truth, even though The Glass Castle is fiction, or nonfiction, we shape our truths by which stories we tell and how we choose to tell them. And if any of my siblings had written this book, it would have been an entirely different book without the facts changing a bit. A number of people have said, well, how much of this how much did you make up? This couldn't all be true. Memoirists, I don't know, y'all are probably too young to remember, but about 10 years ago, there was a big scandal when a memoirist made up a lot of the stuff in his book, and there's been a lot of debate since then. I'm sorry if I'm talking too quickly. But a memoirist made up some of the information on his book, and that's right when my book was coming out in paperback. And I've been challenged a number of times. Oh, this stuff couldn't have happened. How much did you make up? No. You do not make up anything. Now, it's true that a memoirist has a little bit more leeway than an autobiographer. An autobiographer is more like a straight history. And The Glass Castle is a memoir, and it is written from the perspective of a 5-year-old and 6-year-old and 7-year-old girl who doesn't always have a complete grasp on what's going on. She thinks it's really cool that we don't have to sleep on pillows. We're living like Indians, this is great. And she kind of buys into her father's mythology about the family. Now, if I'd written a straight autobiography, it would have been more like a history. That being said, you do not make things up because you violate the trust, the bond between the writer and the author. And people who are reading my book go, what is poverty really like? And there was another scandal not long ago where somebody who wrote about his experiences during the Holocaust, it turned out he made up some of these things. And it not only violates his story, it violates the entire issue of the Holocaust. And it gives Holocaust deniers ammunition, oh, they all make that up. The whole point of memoir writing, the whole point of nonfiction, is to tell the truth. And I think that we memoir writers, we get a little of a bum rap. People think we're exhibitionists saying, oh, all these awful things happened to me, you gotta feel sorry for me. I was in an event one time where somebody sort of shyly said, I came from Liberia and she didn't have it so bad. And there was this big gasp from the audience as if I was gonna get upset that somebody had a worse childhood than I did. But that's not it at all. What we're saying is, this is my life. And maybe you can learn something from it without actually having to go through the nasty business of experiencing it. And in my experience, people are not looking for a freak show. They're looking to understand, who are these homeless people? Or maybe even understand themselves a little bit better. So that's, if it sounds like I'm bragging, it's because I am, but I'm not bragging about myself. I'm bragging about the power of storytelling. Because what I've experienced is that because of my, whatever you want to call it, ability, willingness, craziness, to go ahead and tell my story, people open up to me about their stories. And they share their stories with me. And it's been sort of magical because it's taken me out of the isolation of my shame. And made me realize how many people out there have stories. Now, of course I knew that intellectually. I'm not so stupid that I think that other people crawl out from under a rock. But it has been astonishing to me, the number of people who have come up and said, your story could have been my story. And sometimes there's somebody who, if I would have looked at him, I would have said, oh, that old snob, look at the way she's dressed, all la-di-da. She wouldn't know anything about somebody like me. And this is the great thing about having written a book like this. Somebody asked me one time, they said, is it kind of weird going around having all these people know all this stuff about you? But it's the opposite of weird. Because I can meet a complete stranger and they say, girlfriend, you think you got a crazy parent, let me tell you about mine. And they'll start telling me about their mother. And we have all this stuff in common that I would have never known about. And that is the magic of storytelling, if you are willing to be honest.
Well, your honesty, your compassion for your parents and your family in general is stunning. I first heard you speak on NPR.
Oh,
and
Diane Green, was that the?
Yes, and I think I was tearing up as I approached the Fort Lauderdale airport because your compassion moved me so much. Did you have that as a child?
Well, I've always loved my father. My father, there was never any doubt in my mind that he loved me. He was also a damaged man. And anybody who's ever loved an alcoholic or any drug addict knows that they will break your heart. And then you put it back together and they're going to break it again. And unless somebody wants to fix themselves, you cannot fix it for them. So I love my father. My mother's more complicated. I love her as well. I was never disillusioned by her, because I never had the illusions. It was never there in the first place. She was never a source of comfort and strength to me. I believe, and I really do believe this, that everything in life is both a blessing and a curse, and it's entirely up to us which one we choose to focus on. And the curse about having a mother who doesn't take care of yourself is who doesn't take care of you is you gotta learn to take care of yourself. And the blessing of it is that you learn to take care of yourself. So when I went away to college, I didn't get homesick. You know, I didn't worry, where's mom taking care of me? I was real independent. So being tough and being strong, that comes real easy to me. It's the being soft thing I'm still kind of working on, you know, the learning to trust people. But for me, telling my story, it was a big, big part of that, because I was so prepared to be met with contempt and ridicule that I saw the world as a place filled with potential enemies. And, you know, one of the blessings of my childhood is that I'm a fighter and a scrapper. And one of the curses of my childhood is that I'm a fighter and a scrapper. And people come, kick your butt, you know, yeah. And they were coming up like my friend, my socialite friend. And I was really ready to fight her. What I was unprepared for was the love and the compassion.
So healthy skepticism positioned you to keep your expectations low, but keep going forward.
Oh, well, who would have thought? I mean, a lot of people write memoirs have much more interesting stories. I was ashamed. I was ashamed.
Well, the quality of your writing,
Thank you.
in addition to the truth of Ms. Walls' writing, again, is, of course, you just read it. My friend in here, Esmeralda, has given away both copies of your book, and will go out and buy a third because of the quality of the writing. But one of my students wanted to know, the first chapter opens with an so exquisite, so painfully exquisite description of, well, seeing your mother at the dumpster, but then moving into that, your first strong memory of trying to cook hot dogs when you were 3 years old and being burned from your pink tutu right on up, requiring skin grafts. One of my students asked a very insightful question. Did that scarring and the burning affect you psychologically for a long time afterwards, or were you too young and it was part of the crazy norm?
That is an interesting question. It did affect me in that I sort of knew I was damaged in that way, and that other kids were. It affected me, I think, more as I got older and had to change in gyms, and I was just sort of always kind of hiding. But you know, girls are weird; we all kind of hide. But it was something that I always sort of thought a decent guy, you know, a hard to get, a good catch would never be interested in me because I'm kind of damaged goods. But I was completely wrong. Only a good catch would be interested in me. The sort of person who was interested in the wrong thing would not be interested in me. So.
And of course, you mentioned your husband in your acknowledgments. He is famous in his own right. Do you consider yourself part of a literary couple?
Oh, he's the literary one. He's a very elegant writer. We're a little bit of a yin and yang thing going on. He's a high wasp, and you know, I'm not.
He came from a well-to-do family.
Yeah, his dad was a diplomat, you know, and I thought, once he finds out the truth about me, he's going to throw me like a hot potato. And I warned him. I said, you know, before we got too close, I said, John, I got in a fire with a little girl, and I'm covered with scars. And he said, why are you telling me this? Kind of damaged goods. And he said, no, that's not scars, that's texture. It's a sign. He said, it's a sign that you survived, and that you're stronger than whatever tried to hurt you. And I thought it was just about the kindest and wisest thing anybody ever, and it just made me see it differently. And it's so interesting getting to know his family, which is just this perfect, but every family has its baggage. But we're very different and at the same time very much alike. He gets along with Mom great. He's very tolerant of her. I don't think of us as a literary couple. I'm very fortunate in that he's interested in books like I am, so we can talk about that sort of thing all the time. And the biggest fight we ever had was over Ernest Hemingway. So I guess I should consider myself lucky. He's a bigger fan than I am.
Okay.
But he was the one who pushed me to tell the story.
You mentioned that in your acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Yes. My students are learning the meaning of epigraphs that come before chapters and essays. And in your epigraph in this book, you quote Dylan Thomas about dark and light in the way, the place in the way.
Right. And because I'm fascinated by that passage about the perception and how it sort of is how you choose to see it.
Does the dark still catch up with you?
See, I'm not afraid of the dark. The dark is very necessary and very important for an interesting story. It is.
Yeah.
It is. And if you can shine your light in the dark places, that's where you find the treasures. And if you try to pretend the dark doesn't exist, you're going to have something that's very two-dimensional and very whitewashed. And, I wrote an early version. This is how John, my husband, is so valuable to me. In other ways as well, but as a literary person, he read an early version of The Glass Castle. And I read the first version in 6 weeks, and it was very bad. I don't mean stream of consciousness bad. It was bad journalism. It was, I heretofore not considered the plethora of influences, and I sort of removed myself from everything that happened. And he said, Jeannette, if your parents were buying food for you, how did you eat? I said, I got by. He said, what do you mean you got by? I said, I'm pretty resourceful, He said, no, I don't know, Jeannette. You have to spell it out. You have to spell it out. And I can remember my face burning with shame at that moment. Ain't no way I'm telling people about rooting around in the garbage. And he said, you have to. The truth, just because something is accurate doesn't mean it's true. You have to really get down in those deep, dark, dirty tweets. And a very wise friend of mine said one time, secrets are a little bit like vampires. They suck the life out of you, but they can exist only in the darkness. Once they're exposed to light, there's a moment of horror, but then poof, they lose their power over you. And so when you ask the question about the dark, it's sort of like, well, it's a different, everything. The moon's got the dark side and the light side, and that doesn't mean that the dark side is bad, it's just the flip side of everything has a good side and a bad side. And if you're going to explore the good side, you have to at least be aware of the bad side. And then it sort of explains what else is going on. So I think the two are just very integral. And, does the dark catch up with me? I'll always have issues from my childhood. The first time John tried to eat my plate, he almost lost his hand. I will always have little issues, but I'm a really happy person. People ask why I'm not bitter. You should see the hotel I'm staying at. I got a view of the ocean. They flew me down in first class. Just look where I'm sitting right now. If you are where you want to be, don't complain about how you got there. I might have taken the circumlocutions route, but dang, I'm one of the luckiest people I know. Yeah, so I had a wacky childhood, and people were mean to me, and all sorts of stuff. But they had their issues. Anytime somebody's mean to you, put you down, but you gotta understand, it's because of their issues, not because of you. And it's one of the lessons I learned again, not long ago, touring on behalf of the Glass Castle. The most popular girl in school came up to me and asked me for my autograph. And you could have knocked me over with a feather, the girl from high school. And I said, the world has turned upside down. Here, the most popular girl is asking the least popular girl for her autograph. And she'd always been a big snoot. And she said, your book made me do a lot of thinking. I'm on my 3rd marriage. My first 2 were abusive alcoholics. And I married an alcoholic because my father was an alcoholic. And we always hid it. And we had to be perfect. And she talked about the burden of having to hide the alcoholism and be perfect. And I thought, don't ever assume you know. Don't ever base things on just appearances. And the shame of it is that she and I couldn't bring those barriers down all those years ago. We might have been friends, and we might have found solace in each other. But you think you're protecting yourself by putting up these barriers, you're just isolating yourself. That's all you're doing.
It's a beautiful philosophy. Before the talk, Ms. Walls had said nothing was off limits. So how about if if you answer either of these.
I'm sorry, I'm going on too long. I'm sorry.
No, no.
My answer is a little short.
No, choose A or B, because they're both indirectly or directly about your father, whom you say you loved very much, although he would leave for weeks and months at a time. One question is, why do you think your dad felt he didn't need anything from you? And the other one is, the popular saying, a child will marry his or her parent. How much does your husband remind you of your father?
Oh, these are such good questions. These are really good, deep questions. The reason Dad said he didn't want anything from me is he was ashamed. Unlike my mom, he was keenly aware of his shortcomings. How much do we marry? Do we marry our parents? The number of dates that I walked out on because somebody ordered a drink. I was not going to marry my dad. I got to tell you. And my first husband was the polar opposite of my father. Very cerebral. He sat down every day, except that they were both cerebral, but Eric would sit down every day with a little log of things he was going to do. He was very controlled, very, he was the least flighty human being I've ever known in my life. And when I was describing him to my brother and some conflicts that I was having with my first husband, Brian says, you know, what you're describing would make a great accountant, but you're not in love with him. I think I was afraid of falling in love. I was afraid of meeting that charismatic bad man who was going to make me, you know, write bad checks and do illegal stuff. And I didn't want to marry that. And John reminds me a lot more of my father. He has a slightly, you know, artistic, wild side, but it's in control. So everything's fine in moderation.
All right. And now a question on behalf of my creative writers.
Yes.
An editor plays a huge role.
Yes.
In making a book $1 million plus, $3 million plus seller. Have you had a long time relationship with your editor? Can you talk to us about that part of the writing process?
My editor is Nan Graham. She's quite well known. She was the editor for Frank McCourt, who wrote perhaps what is the most highly regarded memoir out there, which is Angela's Ashes. She was also the editor for Mary Carr. She's sort of the go-to editor for memoirs. My book, The Glass Castle, was my first book with her. I've done 2 other books with her. She's absolutely brilliant.
You did Half-Broke?
Half-Broke Horses and The Silver Star. Yes.
Okay.
I was really, the thing that she was most valuable on, I think, was that I was really tortured about how much of the New York City story to include. I sort of thought, not only that the New York City story was fascinating, but that my kid's sister's story was really interesting. But I didn't quite know how to tell my kid's sister's story. And it was Nan Graham who said, it's her story, not yours, leave it out. She said, you're killing yourself on this. I thought it made an interesting parallel because I do believe that we make choices to go where we are in life. But for whatever reason, my sister was raised in very similar circumstances, not identical because there's no such thing, but you know, she's the youngest, I'm the second. But for whatever reason, she just didn't do as well. And it's always haunted me. As somebody who believes in self-determination and all those good things, how would somebody who had so much talent, so much beauty, so much more going for her than I did, how did she fall by the wayside? I mean, I can tell you, and this is not false modesty, but so I am the dummy in my family. My siblings are all so smart, but they less than me. My great talent is being able to roll up my sleeves and do really hard work. And I think the other ones are so brilliant. My brother's a hard worker as well, but Laurie and Maureen were so brilliant, they never had to work hard.
Your brother Brian is a top-notch detective.
He's retired.
Okay.
He teaches 9th grade English.
Oh, wow.
And his cop training came in very handy because he's in a really rough area in Brooklyn. And he was told, if you can get these kids not to mug you, it'll be a miracle. And the kids adore him. And he's a great, great, great teacher. But Brian and I have always been the nose to the grindstones, whereas my 2 sisters, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. But I sort of believe that it's less about what you have and more about what you do with what you have. And Brian and I just always worked very hard, but Maureen's story, like I said, it really tortured me. And Nan said leave that out. John was my more valuable editor. He was one, I find everything fascinating. You can probably tell by the way I kind of wander a little bit. But I had all these stories about my wacky relatives, like my Aunt Vest, who got into like this duel with the town hooker, and they were like battling each other with umbrellas. I thought it was this very funny scene. But John said, you've got too many wacky relatives. Leave them all out. Leave out all the crazy town stuff. This story, the heart of this story, is you and your relationship with your father. And that took me a while to figure. Well, I didn't figure it out. John had to tell me, but he was the one who told me. And I'm going to defer to you on this because I'm not the expert, but he was because my background is in journalism, celebrity journalism, I know, but journalism nonetheless. And he was the one who said, you don't have to tell everything. And that was a bit of a lesson for me, because I was like, well, I left this out, I gotta tell this. And also, not to be afraid to use the tools of fiction, by which I do not mean fictionalizing, but understand that there's a beginning, middle, and end to the story. What is the story? I told you I spent 6 weeks writing the first version and 5 years rewriting it. Because I didn't know what the story was. There were so many things it could have been. I thought it was going to be a lot more about the New York City years. There was this great scene where I thought it was a great scene. I had Donald Trump on one line, and my dad called on the other line. And Trump could hear the phone ringing, and he kind of got a little irritated. He said, you need to answer that. Hold on, Mr. Trump, I'll get right back to you. I said, and it was Dad. He's like, honey, I got a great story for you. I said, Dad, I have Donald Trump on the other line. I think he's going to be impressed. And he said, hang up on that money-grubbing son of a bitch. I got bullets in the bag for you. And I said, Dad, I'm on deadline. I can't talk to you. And he said, that's your problem, Jeannette. You've got to learn to shoot for the stars and aim high. You're working for the boss, man. You're never going to make it that way. And and I thought it was sort of hilarious, but it had a sort of weird sitcom quality. My New York City section was too much like you mushed together Sex in the City and the Grapes of Wrath. It was just too weird. It didn't really work. And the heart of the book is the relationship between me and my father.
And your dad gave you the title of this novel, this memoir.
Yes.
Yeah. And again, for those who don't know, could you just briefly tell us why?
It's funny. I don't think of myself as homeless, but that's probably what we didn't have a home. But this is where I'm being like my mom. Well, we didn't have a home, but we slept in cars, or we slept in cardboard boxes. But we were just in between homes. But we sometimes we'd have a home, but it was a little shack, and then we'd go sleep on the beach. And when I was in West Virginia, we did have a house, but it was just no indoor plumbing, no electricity. But Dad always, he said, oh, this is temporary. He promised us that one of these days he was going to build for us a great big mansion. And it was all going to be solar heated. It was going to have glass ceilings and glass walls, and all the appliances would run through solar energy. He was all the time working on it, and when times would get tough, he'd pull out the plans, and he called it the Glass Castle. And all Dad had to do was get our fortune, strike it rich, and then he was going to build us our glass castle. So that's what I call the book.
And he has to be so very proud.
I think he would be. I urge people to tell their stories at the same time. I don't know if I could have told it when Dad was alive. People say, your mother must be proud of you. Not really. It doesn't really affect her that much. She's like, well, yeah. She's okay with it, but Dad, I think, would have been proud. Yeah.
We want to let you have a sip of water.
Okay.
And we certainly want to leave time for your questions. Who has been waiting to ask one?
Did your dad build the glass castle?
Dad never did build the glass castle, no.
Does he plan on doing it?
My father died.
Dad.
My father died. But I will tell you, I think the glass castle was less about the physical structure and more about the dream. It was more about the hope and the belief that one day I would have a nice place to live. And that has been realized.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome.
So it was metaphorical in that sense.
I think so.
Yes.
I think so. So many things that Dad did and said were metaphoric.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Throughout the whole story, how many times have you been to the hospital in your family?
The question is, how many times have I been to the hospital? Right? One time for the burn. That was it.
Your father went to the hospital.
Yeah, my father.
And he stayed.
My father rescued. When I was in the hospital for the burn, my father came and scooped me out and ran out.
That was the only time?
Yeah, that's the only time I've ever. And I didn't get my teeth ever worked on at all. The first time I ever went to a dentist, I was 21 years old.
And you still came to the hospital the same day?
Yeah, oh, I have a doctor I go see. I'm in very good health. But the hospital and that whole medical care world, that was not my world. That was, we hid from authorities.
Yes, as is common
Yes.
in that
Yes.
population. And this young lady?
Yes, so where's your sister now?
My oldest sister is still in Manhattan. My kid sister Maureen is still she's in California. And one of the many wonderful things that's happened as a result of the book is we're back in touch. Some people say, well, why didn't you explain in the book what happened to Maureen? Because I didn't know. And she wouldn't return my calls or letters. And I'm trying to get her to come live with me in Virginia. But it's very interesting to me. Maureen, she says she never wants to live where it's cold ever again. I said, you know, cold's not so bad. We've got a thermostat. Move this little Lincoln into your order. It gets warm like magic. And it's funny because she is morbidly afraid of the cold. I like the cold because I can get warm now. I can move the thermostat. I can take a hot bath whenever I want. It's a miracle. But sometimes people who go through the exact same experience, one can come out traumatized, the other can come out stronger for it.
Professor Dina Kollek.
I loved your book. It was really wonderful. I read it when it first came out, and I can't remember thinking back, but there was a point where you realized your mother owned a lot of land that was very valuable. And I wondered whether you have this, is that the land that you have?
We still got, no, that's not the land. I'm never getting my hands on that land, I'll tell you. It's still in Texas. I don't know exactly where. My husband was a very talented interviewer, very aggressive interviewer, cannot get it out of her. Oh, it's in West Texas. They've been making noises that they might drill on it lately. So, you know, indeed it might be worth what she says it was, if there's oil or gas on it. If not, it just went worthless West Texas. You know, I was at an event one time, somebody said, your dad should have sold that land, y'all could have had a normal life. And this other woman in the event said, if she'd sold that land, that no good husband would have got his mitts on the money and would have gone in a 3-day bender. And it's true! And so I have no regrets. I have no regrets that he was, because it would have been gone. And now she's got a little cushion in case she can pass it on to of all of his children, my brother's the only one who had children. So if my brother's daughter can inherit the land, that's fine. I don't need it. Not mine. I have no claims to it. But yeah, we still got it. She still got a big old diamond ring, too. She had a big old diamond ring, which was homeless. She'd walk around with this big old rock on her hand. And I said, Mom, aren't you afraid somebody will steal it? She goes, oh, it's so big, everybody thinks it's fake. My brother and I had found it, and that's the one that does gall me a little bit. We could have bought something with it. But she said it helped her self-esteem when she needed it, that self-esteem is more important than money. That's the funny thing about Mom. She could be really wise, but at the same time idiotic. It's like, yeah, self-esteem is really important, but you gotta have food too.
She never thought of pawning it.
Never. It would have never crossed her mind.
Yeah,
No.
but it might have your father.
Yes, oh yeah. Oh,
Yes.
Dad would have sold it a long time ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of diamonds and Park Avenue and that kind of thing, has your fame and your success allowed you to do things either for nonprofits or philanthropically or for your family that otherwise you might not
Oh
be
yeah.
able to?
I mean, I don't know about fame, but I mean, I got a lot. You know, I've got a good life, and I used to think that happiness came when you felt superior to other people. You could feel like la-di-da, you're putting on fancy clothes, and that doesn't bring happiness. Trust me, it doesn't. You know. And I go out and buy all these expensive designer clothes when I'm in New York, and there's still something missing, there's something absent. You know, my mother lives with me, and I help out a number of other people. I do some work for philanthropic organizations. Life is really good. It's beautiful. Not only do I not have any grounds to complain, if I were to be struck down by lightning right now, I'd say, you know, I got more than my fair share. I really did. I'm a really very blessed person, and I know that.
Well, we still have questions? Yes.
Hi. So I know that during the writing process, revisions are there to kind of you go through multiple copies of the same story. And I know that you were speaking. You said there was a lot of shame and embarrassment with what you had to do to survive in your earlier years. When you had that final revision, were you almost afraid that you had exposed too much?
Almost afraid. I mean, I was in a fetal position under my desk. I was like, I can't let people know this. It's too embarrassing. And, you know, I told you the story about about the digging the food out of the garbage and all that. I was like, geez, what am I doing here? And a couple of weeks before publication, I went to my husband, I said, I can't live with this stuff out. This is, how am I gonna like walk down the street? This is so embarrassing. We gotta give back the money. He said, too late, we've already spent it. So I don't think that was true, but I think he was just trying to push me into it. But you know, the process of truth-telling is scary. It's really scary because you put on armor and you take off that armor and bang, I'm pretty vulnerable here. But the thing is, it's a lot easier to move around and it's really a lot easier to give people a hug that way. But yeah, it's a terrifying process. You know, and I don't want to be presumptuous here, but if it's something that you or somebody you know is grappling with, you know, if there's a scene that you or your friend is how can I tell this isn't, if it's so excruciatingly horrible, how could I possibly put this down? That means you must tell it. That means you must tell it. You can always decide to take it out later on, but if it's that pivotal, then that's what's important. And maybe you'll be as lucky as I have these things, they don't bother me anymore. But now one of the challenges is you're not only exposing your secrets, but the secrets of the people you love. And how do you deal with that? How, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think I could have written this book when my father was alive. I offered to show it to my mother before publication. And she wasn't that interested in seeing it. I offered to show it to everybody in my family. Only my brother was interested in seeing it. He's got this really steel track memory, so he and I would discuss scenes. But you know, the truth-telling process is very difficult. That being said, nothing but good things have happened, as far as I'm concerned, from having told it. I mean, I don't know how other people feel. I know that some folks in the little town in West Virginia where I grew up, they're a little hurt. That town doesn't get a whole lot of attention, and for them to get so much attention over a not entirely favorable portrait is a little painful for some people. And another truth though is that my parents could have been poor at any place on this planet. They would have been downtrodden. This was not a reflection of the town I grew up on, but I think it's difficult for them to take. But yeah, the truth-telling process is very difficult, and you always question yourself: am I close enough to the truth? What is the truth? You know, toward the end, also, I went to my husband. I said, I was reading it. I went up to him. I said, I've got to start all over. This is terrible. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, I've been reading it back. There's nothing here but words. He said, honey, I think you've been working too long. And he literally took it out of my hand. He said, she's been working too long. You can't overhead it. You can't look at something too long and start taking out the good stuff and putting in the bad stuff.
Well, your writing allows us to see each of those scenes you've crafted and put so many hours into. I think we have time for just 2 or 3 more questions. Right here, Karina.
Do you think if it wasn't for your husband, would you write this story?
Interesting question. If it wasn't for my husband, would I write this story? I tried a couple of times before I met him and when I was younger, and I'd write 200 or 300 pages and throw it out. I tried to fictionalize it. I'm not very good at making stuff up, and I used all of my siblings' middle names. And when you're fictionalizing something, the story's already so weird, am I supposed to make it weirder or less weird? I couldn't figure what I was supposed to change. I've come to realize that the kind of fiction that I'm drawn to is very close to nonfiction, and that you don't change that much. But I didn't know all that. But I don't think I would have had the courage to have written it, gone through that. I might have written that first version and I would have thrown it away. I would not have taken it further.
Yes. Right here.
The question is, does it bother me that they didn't take an interest in the book? No, probably, of course. I'm not going to change them. You know, I can sit around wishing for them to be somebody else, and it's just not going to happen. They are who they are. Love them, but I'm not going to get that from them.
It's all very zen. I'm very envious.
Actually.
So, in the back. Yes. Do you mind standing to ask your question?
Would you say that your upbringing has caused you to have a greater appreciation for the simple things in life, like you mentioned earlier, just the appreciation for the thermostat that so many would take for granted?
Yeah, y'all heard that question. Yes, absolutely. I think that I never take anything for granted. Every time I flush a toilet, I say, thank you, God. And I think anybody who grew up without indoor plumbing does the same, because it's a miracle. It's just like, whoosh, it just disappears. Life is good. And I don't mean to knock anybody who complains, but some of the things people find to complain about are bizarre to me. It's, everybody has a bad day. You can't find a parking space. It's frustrating. This is not the end of the world. And I'm fascinated by the things that some people find to make them unhappy. And there's so much, we are so fortunate in this country. Yeah, I know that there's difficulties and unemployment is high, there's lots of things to complain about, but my gosh, we are so lucky. And always, and I will never, I go grocery shopping. I can buy anything I want. And that's a miracle to me. I don't have to like go to the grocer and ask if he has any rotten old food he's about to throw away. I can buy cherries if they're $4.99 a pound. That's astonishing.
So years of working on revising your novel, The Power of Truth-Telling, Healthy Skepticism, Pragmatism. What are our other takeaways? Truth. The search, the risk, and the courage to tell it, right? These are all extremely powerful lessons. And Dr. Proctor, I see, is ready to keep you on schedule. May that student, he has a
This will be the last question.
He'll be the last one in the third row.
Do you believe in God?
Yes, I believe in God. I believe in God. There's no question in my mind. How I know, I don't know, but it's yes, and I think yes, I do.
Well, we want to thank you for coming. My personal takeaway, and I want to actually emphasize this to the student body, you said things about the pure and simpleness of truth, and you talked about things being a blessing and a curse, and you talked about your scars with your husband saying it's texture. I thought that was just moving. But for you students, she's really sending a message about it's not about what you have, but it's what you do with what you have. So with that, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.